Save me. Only you can stop this killing. You've got to make love with me.
Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys.
Welcome to Hey You Guys podcast. I'm Rob, this is Liam. Now, if it's a Liam episode, you will get a highly charged introduction about how it's the greatest piece of cinematic history, everything like that. If it's a Rob episode, you usually get some funny recap of the film. But we watched Cat People this week, 1982. And all I can think about is the fact that you have to actually, in order to stop killing, you have to sleep with your sibling.
Yeah. Yeah, that's basically it. It's not explained until I checked. It's an hour and 30 minutes into this movie when, via a music video set on a racket, they randomly decide to explain the movie to you. But it's basically, the plot is you has to have sex with a brother. The brother has to have sex with the sister to stop killing people when they turn into leopards.
So basically,
and also so they can actually have sex with other people.
So if they get down to fucking, they then become
a leopard,
cat or a leopard.
Yeah, they just become just a leopard, just a self-aware leopard, I suppose.
So they become a leopard, and then they have, in order to become human again, they have to kill, and that's the vicious cycle. Unless, for some unknown reason, I don't know whether they've been cursed, they have to fuck a sibling.
Yes, they have to have sex with their brother or sister, which is absolutely bonkers. And I remember, because I didn't know anything about this film going into it. Nope. Truth be told, I had never heard of it even until very recently. And I was watching it, and there's that whole section at the start with Malcolm McDowell, who is a very odd-looking character. But
Can I just say, the scariest thing about this film, Malcolm McDowell's hair.
Oh, yeah, it's a terrifying haircut. But even then, and he's not the most handsome man. But if I had to describe Malcolm McDowell in a few words, it would be down to fuck. Like, that's his vibe in general. I mean,
as soon as he introduces himself.
Oh, and the thing is, I'm watching this film, and I'm like, well, they're brother and sister. And all of a sudden, you get these weird, sexy vibes from him. I'm like, is it just because he was in Caligula? Is that what I'm getting? I was like, no. He clearly wants to have sex with this woman. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, well, it's obviously going to be revealed later in the film that they're not actually brother and sister. No, they're brother and sister. Yeah. It's just even weirder than you think. But it's like, it opens with filth and basically retains that for the remainder of the film. Although there is quite a bit of violence, and as absurd, if you haven't seen Cat People, the premise is undoubtedly bonkers. It's a very erotic horror thriller, but it's actually also quite good. And a large part is, it's a talented director in Paul Schrader. I mean, he's a little bit of a filthmeister for sure. But this is a guy, who wrote the screenplay for Raging Bull, a lot of Scorsese's best films, Taxi Driver as well. But it's bonkers. There's no two ways about it.
It's a good film. It's got a decent cast. I mean, it's got Kevin McAllister's dad in it, randomly as the love interest.
Well, it's strange that he doesn't. I feel bad for him because when everybody thinks of this film, they invariably think of Natasha Kinski and they think of Malcolm McDowell. But it's John Hurd, isn't it, who played?
John Hurd.
Yeah. John Hurd is the second star of this film. He's nowhere to be seen on any of these posters. But if you're watching it for the first time, Malcolm McDowell plays a big role in it, and obviously he's very memorable. But he disappears for large swathes of this movie.
Well, he's a leopard for most of it.
Exactly. But from the second quarter onwards, this is really a love story, a very odd love story, but between Natasha Kinski's Irina and John Hurd's Oliver. That's what the rest of this film is. But he's nowhere to be seen. Nobody mentions him. He's not in any of the artwork. When anybody talks about this film, they never mention him. And I'm not sure if it's just because he is, McAllister's dad now. That's what people think of. But I think it's pretty harsh because he's actually really good in this film.
Sorry, I can't get off the whole sleeping with your sibling thing for a minute.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's probably worth mentioning.
Again. But the rules, right? Does it have to be a sibling? So I know that for some reason, they may be the last two were-leopards alive. But previously down the history, were you allowed to sleep with your parent? Did they have to be a sibling, or was it just a familial thing?
Well, it seems to be a familial thing, but they was certainly, they tried to explain it during the kind of weird music video section where it's all kind of, bathed in orange and they're walking along the desert and they're finally explaining the plot an hour and a half in. But it is the idea that they basically bred with humans for so long, the leopards. And Well, that's what I thought so anyway. I mean, the opening sequence of this film, you're watching it, and the first question you ask yourself is like, is that leopard having sex with that woman tied to a tree?
That's what I wanted to say, right? I want to use a word that you used last week. When she was tied up, and to be fair, she didn't seem upset that she was tied to a tree.
No.
Did she just bag off with that cat?
Well, yeah, I mean, that would, like, again, not knowing anything about this film, I'm like, well, this is a weird, artsy introduction to this film, kind of, Bergman stars, like, oh, it's like something from the Seventh Seal or something like that.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute. Are we being led to believe that that leopard is having sex with that woman tied to a tree? And of course, you doubt yourself at first. Like, no, it's just like an artistic interpretation. They're just being close. It's just kind of hinting at a relationship between the leopards and the humans. And then you watch the rest of the film. You're like, no, I'm pretty sure that leopard got down with that woman. Yeah. No doubt. And of course, that's part of the narrative that they explain, that they kind of mix with the humans slowly. They kind of combine their genes, and that's what's led to this bizarro curse. I mean, I'm not sure how much we should really read into the explanation. It does come from a previous film. This film is a remake of, 1942 original?
Cat People. But I was
and which also had a sequel, Return of the Cat People, starring Simone Simon.
They only share name and the pool scene, apparently. The rest of it is completely different.
Well, yeah, I only watched a little bit of the original, and the main thing you get is that the zoo looks very similar. I'm not saying it's shot in the same zoo, and I didn't stick around long enough to find out whether it's actually set in New Orleans or anything like that. But it definitely has that whole thing where, it starts with it's Simone Simon, the actress. She's drawing the leopard in the cage. So there are obviously nods to the original, but other than that, I don't think this movie was getting made in anywhere near the same way back in 1942, that's for sure. This is very much I was going to say an 80s film. I'm not sure if it belongs in any decade, to be honest.
This film is completely on its own. What started off everything? What started off introducing Oliver into our world, into Irina's world, things like that, was the fact that they caught the leopard, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the rules are, you have sex, you become a leopard, you kill, you become human.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Who did he have sex with before the hooker even came into the room? Because he was already a leopard.
Yeah, the whole thing with the prostitute didn't really make any sense, and both on a practical and a narrative level, because, yeah, like you said, who's he already had sex with, and now she comes in and he's a leopard. I guess it makes sense, the idea that, well, they don't explain too much because they're waiting until the 90-minute mark, apparently, to really explain this film. So he's had sex with someone else, and now he needs to find someone to kill. So he's like, he apparently had some kind of deal. Like, I can only assume the guy in the motel knows what's going on, because he seems to be in the know. But as bizarre as all that is, the only bit that really struck me is that you've got a prostitute in the scene, and she's already down to her, Sunday bed. Well, she's down to a delicate, should we say. And you have the whole bit where the leopard attacks her, and it's quite gruesome because the violence in this film is pretty hardcore for the most part. She crawls down the stairs, she turns around, and then for no apparent reason, like a fucking Benny Hill sketch, her bra just pops open. I was like, oh, well, this is the tone we're going for. Like, even when it was almost like he forgot. It's like, wait a minute, why haven't we got more tits in this scene?
Yeah.
There always has to be more tits.
All I could think of, when she started stripping off and stealing money from him, all I could think of was $25 for a massage. Seems like a good deal.
It was bad even for 1982, I suppose. But this all happens early on. I mean, I mentioned earlier the scene where Malcolm McDowell gets very kind of, hands-on with his, his sister, and you are kind of dropped into this.
When he's showing her the creepy circus cabinet, and he's sniffing her.
Yeah, I mean, dude, you are getting creepy clowns and incest in the same goddamn scene. I didn't think that was allowed by law.
Apparently.
Well, that was when I really, I was like, well, this is pretty bonkers. But as I said, even though in the opening sequence, you're like, well, there's a leopard having sex with a woman, it's done in a relatively artful way, a tasteful way,
Yeah.
And you're like, well, it's a kind of artsy, erotic thriller. But when you do have Malcolm McDowell, one of the creepiest men to ever show his face on a cinema screen, getting all incestuous with his sister as they look at a cabinet of creepy clowns.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, we're off to the races now.
What else? Sorry. I just want to say, while you were talking about Malcolm McDowell, the other thing I couldn't buy about the film, again, is one of Rob's, of everything in this film, you don't have sandwiches that quick. How easy it was to pick up Dolly Parton in a cemetery.
Yeah, she did look a bit like she really. This film, I don't know, it's sex politics. Needless to say, they're not very 2022, to say the least. Every guy is a borderline sex offender. Everyone, like, especially with Natasha Kinski, who has had a bit of a weird career in so much that she's always been kind of, represented as a kind of,
The only thing I can ever think of her from was she was in a parachuting film with...
A parachuting film? I didn't know parachuting
Charlie
films.
Sheen called Terminal Velocity.
Oh, she was in that, wasn't she? She was, the one I think she's most famous for is probably Paris, Texas, which was 2 years later. That was in 1984. Which, again, there's a lot of films, especially early in her career, where she is being very sexy and she's standing next to very old, very, sex-driven men, shall we say. And she's, I guess in this she does get her own back. But there's no arguing the fact that she is an absolutely gorgeous woman, and make no mistake, she's not just there because she's gorgeous to look at, and she is, she's a model, she's incredibly statuesque, but she's also a very good actress. But I wonder sometimes if it was almost as if Paul Schrader saw Natasha Kinski and just thought, she looks like a cat, we should make a cat sex film, because she really does have feline features.
And that's the feline features, and that was that's the only thing I could really pick up from the beginning of the film. After the leopard got off with the woman tied to a tree, they had another woman they pushed into the cave, and she had feline features as well. And then she kind of morphed then, and you were in modern day, and then you become Natasha Kinski. And her feline features.
She's so striking.
Yeah, it's absolutely.
She's incredibly striking.
You don't see many, especially in the 80s, short hair.
No, there was a spell, wasn't there? I mean, you mentioned last week, there was the whole Gozer thing. So I think in the early 80s, there was like a little spell of women having quite elfin features and short hair. So I think it was just like a couple of years there in the early 80s. Okay. So, but yeah, she totally pulls it off. But I mean, aesthetically though, she is one of those rare miracles, because her father is Klaus Kinski, and he's, I'm not sure if you're aware of him, but he was in films such as Nosferatu, and Fitzcarraldo is probably the film he's most famous for. But he is a very distinct-looking man, if I'm being incredibly kind. But it's amazing how this occasionally happens. Like, you get guys with incredibly distinct features, and rarely does it work with guys. If they've got big eyes, they often look mental. But if they've often, quite often, because I guess this guy's famous, he's managed to punch above his weight, shall we say. Yeah. He's done well. And somehow he's produced this utterly striking daughter. And there are other examples. There's, what's his name? Steven Tyler. Steven Tyler with his ridiculous features, his giant lips, all that jazz. It's all been softened by his wife. And it's produced one of the most beautiful women ever born in Liv Tyler. The weirdest one is maybe Ron Howard ending up somehow, his daughter's Bryce Dallas Howard. I'm not quite sure how that happened, but every so often these weird looking men,
especially when you look at
these gorgeous looking women.
Especially when you look at the genes from him, because look at his brother Clint Howard. Poor Clint Howard.
Yeah. How Ron Howard's a stretch, but like you see Clint Howard, and you're like, how is Clint Howard so closely related to Bryce Dallas Howard? It's absolutely bonkers. This all sounds like I'm going to. You really do need to have a. If you don't know who he is, Klaus Kinski, have a look at Klaus Kinski, and then take a look at Natasha Kinski, and you will be absolutely bemused that is the father of that daughter. It is absolutely bonkers. But
so, I mean, let's get to it, right? There's a lot for us to talk about with this film. I mean, we can talk about Oliver, we can talk about all of this, but let's get to the nudity side of it, right? Because it's going to happen sooner or later. We're going to get to it.
Well, we can't keep going down this route with the plot. I tried to explain the plot to my wife, and like as I was explaining it, it felt like I was explaining a dream. Like if you get up really in the morning and you like, oh, I've got to explain this dream, and as you're explaining it, it's suddenly the dream logic drifts away, and you're like, I'm just talking gibberish. That happened to me when I was explaining this movie to my wife. And as I did, she stabbed herself in the hand in the kitchen. And I'm still not convinced that she didn't do it on purpose to drown out the sound of me explaining this film. So it probably is best that we talk about
your wife didn't watch this with you.
She didn't watch this with me. No.
So
which is, I'm not sure if that's a good or a bad thing.
I actually watched this with my wife. And to watch it with your wife is interesting. Not so much watching, what is it classed as, an erotic thriller, anything like that.
Yeah.
But when you're watching it with your wife, and your wife just turns around and goes, ooh, Annette O'Toole's got a nice pair of tits, hasn't she? From my wife.
Well, the thing is, though, it's worth mentioning, and I'm glad that your wife mentioned it, so it takes the edge off what we're about to say. Because all the way through this film, of course, again, Natasha Kinski, she's so statuesque, and she's so feline, and she exudes sexuality. There's no two ways about it. In a very different way to Malcolm McDowell does. He does as well, but in a very different way. And all the way through, Annette O'Toole's character Alice is very much being played off as the dowdy equivalent. She's a bit of a dirty one because she gets into a bar with Irina for the first time and immediately starts talking filth. There's no build-up or anything like that. But as is the way of this film, at one point, for no apparent reason, her top falls off. Let's make no qualms about it.
Jumps straight into the pool.
Yeah, so she's in the pool, she's topless. There's no need to try and explain why it happens. It just happens. But the shock of how gorgeous Annette O'Toole, she's got, there's no two ways about it, an absolutely spectacular rack. And I think it was just because it came as something of a shock.
But it wasn't just the rack, right? I don't know whether it was the hair and the pigtails or just the red hair or anything like that. But I've had a reverse crush. Like, I grew up watching these films, having crushes on the women as I grow older. I'm now watching this film for the first time and I'm thinking, fuck me, Annette O'Toole is stunning.
Yeah, it wasn't one of those things that I'd never really thought about it. And again, because, I'm probably similar to yourself. I think of her as being, Superman's mum from Smallville. But then, you suddenly see this. But even then, I think for the most of the film, obviously your eyes drawn elsewhere and your attention's drawn elsewhere. But then suddenly, and again, I'm not sure if it was Annette O'Toole's idea or the director's idea. I suspect it was the director. But at this point, you're like, well, anything goes. It's like everyone's getting naked. Because there's no real reason for her character to get nude at this point. But she does. And,
also, you say about being unreal. Who's given 5 minutes to take a quick dip?
Yeah, it doesn't. Again, they're trying so hard to force her nudity into this film.
Yes.
There's no reason at all.
You get to the gym and she goes, we're closing. Oh, come on, a quick dip. Okay, you've got 5 minutes. It takes me fucking 5 minutes to get my swim gear on.
Well, not in this film. As we've already established, clothes just fall off in this film. But, excuse me, as much as there's no two ways about it, we're always going to talk about the nudity in this film because there is a lot of it and the sexuality which runs all the way through this film. But it's also, as we did mention, quite an artistic film in many respects, and I actually think a well-directed film. And I think a big part of that is how well it establishes New Orleans as a place.
Yes.
It's as much of a character as anyone else. And I think maybe because I was trying to. Someone's like, oh, well, is there another movie like this? And the only one I could think, and it's not as good as that movie, but it was Don't Look Now. And I'm thinking maybe I'm only saying that because Don't Look Now has a famous sex scene. And that film is famously, Venice is as famous about that film as anything else. Obviously people think of Donald Sutherland, but I think when people think of Don't Look Now, they think of The Dwarf and they think of Venice. And in this film, they really did lean into the idea of New Orleans as a movie. And I'm sure there are quite a few out there, but it's not your obvious US-based location. There aren't that many movies set in New Orleans. You think of the films we've seen, going back to this podcast, the ones set in New York, Chicago, San Francisco, a whole bunch. But I thought it was quite refreshing to see New Orleans. It is a really interesting location, but it did it without falling into the trap of cliche. Because I think you can fall into the cliches of what New Orleans is like. I really felt like this was a kind of clearer representation of what living in New Orleans in the 80s was like, minus all the sex with cats, of course.
You are right. The introduction of New Orleans in this was done really well. The whole zoo thing and fucking anthropological. Am I saying that right?
Anthropomorphic?
No, when you study fucking animals.
Okay, let's go with that. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it's officially called, when you fucking study animals,
Yeah, when you fucking study animals.
Yeah.
That whole side of it. Like,
I've got a PhD in when you fucking study animals, It's like that. It's one of those.
When the whole side of it about the animal side and the zoo and everything. I mean, they turned this fucking Oliver dude into a superhero. Like, there's a or an action hero, sorry. There's a leopard in there. You got to go in and shoot there. Okay, I'm going to go through the window. Why?
Yeah, it doesn't really need to happen. And it's a strange thing because obviously they decided they want to keep it within this kind of within the zoo, that narrative. But, you've got these leopards on the loose who are killing people. And it feels like all the cops have just been told, like, listen, guys, get out the way. He's from the zoo. It's like nobody's going to just let him through. They're like, dude, we're kids.
did he show up at as well?
All of them, and he's just kind of shepherded straight to the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a bit of an odd character because he's just a dude from the zoo, but then he becomes briefly a bit of an action hero. As you say, there's the bit with the window. He ends up hanging off the ladders. It's all a little bit 48 Hours, funny, a movie from the same year.
With Annette O'Toole.
With Annette O'Toole,
who I didn't find as attractive in that film as I did in this film.
Well, she wasn't just randomly taken off the top. I think sometimes it was like Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yeah.
Like, I think everyone knew she was vaguely attractive, but when she took off a top in Trading Places, and again, like, there's no two ways about it, another absolutely gold star rack. I think a lot of people were like, holy shit, I didn't know she was that hot.
Yeah.
And I think it was the same thing with Annette O'Toole for me. But yeah, Oliver probably goes on the most interesting journey because, again, you know, I mentioned that he gets pretty short shrift in terms of the advertising, certainly, and the way people talk about this film. But he goes from zoo guy to action guy to a very sexual being, you know. Like like the second half, if you kind of take out all the weird stuff with, you know, leopard murder and leopard dissection, the only movie I've ever seen with, by the way, with a leopard dissection, certainly one that graphic.
Did you hear the trainer in the background of that?
No.
So that's a real cat he's doing the autopsy on.
Is it really?
Yes.
Oh, Jesus. I thought it looked impressive.
Yeah. As he moves it and the cat's head hits the table, you can hear the trainer going, easy.
Easy there, fellas. There's a leopard right there.
Yeah.
Well, I again, you know, you think about, they say with movies, don't work with kids, don't work with dogs, certainly. I mean, you know, obviously I've never, you know, owned a leopard, but I have an excitable black cat. And I can tell you, trying to convince them to do anything is all but impossible. The idea of, like, you know, trying to get a leopard to do anything is insane. And obviously there was no CG for any of this. And I actually think they've done a pretty good job in this film in terms of kind of shepherding the leopard around, obviously shooting around them to a certain extent. But for the most part, there's no, like, obvious thing which takes you out of the movie. Obviously, there are limitations to what they can do. But again, it speaks to the level of quality from the director himself that those sequences all work. But again, you know, outside of his screenwriting, this is a guy, you know, he's directed quite a few films. I think he did First Reformed with Ethan Hawke not too long ago. He did American Gigolo, a very well-regarded film from 1980, just before this. And again, it's a bizarre premise. Like, it shouldn't have made it past the B-movie premise, but there's so much talent involved that you're just like, wait, I know this is absolutely ridiculous. I know it's oddly filthy, but it's also really goddamn good. And again, to bring it back to, you know, that character in particular, I think a big part of that goes to John Hurt, who I think is the secret source, dare I say, of this movie, a term I already regret using in regards to this film. But I feel like he's like the kind of secret MVP. I mean, the real MVP obviously is Natasha Kinski, but, you know, I think he's what kind of grounds the movie to a certain extent, because obviously when you have those sequences with Natasha Kinski and Malcolm McDowell, you can't relate to any of this. It's absolutely bananas. But John Hurt just about brings it into the realm of believability in the same way that Annette O'Toole does, I think. So, yeah, I think he's, you know, and as an important part of this movie as just about anyone else.
I think you're sleeping on Ed Begley Jr.
Oh, well, there is that as well. There is that as well.
You know, did Ed Begley Jr., who he is now, or who he became in the 90s and the 2000s, do you think he would have gone, you know what, I'll make cat people? And, like, the way he's acting in that film, everything he said, like, it is so un-Ed Begley Jr., it's insane. And
it is indeed.
I had to laugh. Like, when the leopard went a bit nuts, and they were like, get me the shock stick.
Yeah.
Like, the whole surgical thing of strapping it to his arm. Like, what
it makes no sense.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't make any sense. And then I'm like, would it be able to rip his arm off at the shoulder? Like, that was pretty, but again, you know, to anyone who hasn't actually seen this movie and is listening to the podcast, that's one of the more shocking things. It's what it reminded me of was, even though it's nothing like his movies, Nicholas Winding Refn movies, where there isn't a huge amount of violence, but when there is, it's graphic and really gets your attention because it's incredibly brutal. And that's what you get in this film. Like the bit with the prostitute earlier, when the leopard goes after a leg, it's nasty stuff. It's almost Paul Verhoeven levels of body horror. You know, he gets his not only does he get his arm ripped off, but you can see the bones sticking out.
Yeah.
It's always going that extra level of gruesome, and it turns everything up to the max. And because again, you do have these characters who ground it. It means that when you have the weird sexual stuff, which is prevalent throughout the film, and obviously the gory stuff, I feel like it hits harder. It certainly has a greater impact. But it's like you keep coming back. It's hard to ground yourself with this movie because there's nothing else quite like it. There's nothing really to compare it to.
When you're about getting ripped from the shoulder, and then they did that artistic thing of showing the drain and showing the blood running to the drain,
like Psycho.
Yeah, well, I was thinking more somebody opened the doors, the lift doors of The Shining.
Oh, yeah. Well, it feels like there are nods.
There was more blood going into that drain than it is in a human body.
Yeah, well, it's almost like, again, I'm trying to get my head around the idea of where the director was with this film, because he's clearly taking it very seriously and sees it as a piece of art, and in many respects it is. But it's also so aggressively filthy. Yeah. And so from a man's perspective, it's almost absurd.
I mean, the whole full frontal stuff is there as well. Let's get to it right. At the end of the film, Natasha Kinski turns around and says, look, I don't want to kill anyone. I love you. So make love to me and leave me as a leopard.
Yeah.
So when she strips off, she goes into the house. She turns around. She faces him. All me and my wife could say at that point. Once again, I'm making my wife to try and soften the blow. As we're looking at Natasha Kinski being full frontal, it looks like she shaved half of a bush. Did you see that?
It was a bit strange. I mean, you're picking out a strange bit. I actually thought it was a bit odd when I was like, why did he tie her up?
Why did he tie her up? And my wife said, ooh, he's tied her legs a little bit close. You ain't getting anything in there.
Well, the thing is, I was like, does bondage save the day? Like, I couldn't quite get what they were implying at the end, because he ties her up, but then she becomes a leopard, I presume, because obviously they go back to the zoo afterwards.
Yeah,
and they're implying that she's become a leopard and he's keeping her in the zoo. But surely, if you're a leopard and you're tied like that, it's not going to end very well.
That's quite uncomfortable to become a leopard with your front paws and back paws just in that position.
That's what I mean. Is it a buckaroo situation? And I know that's very disturbing, but these are the questions you have to ask when it just makes no sense.
You have to ask. She's a leopard. He's tied her down because she will become a leopard and so he has to call for help. So whoever he calls then comes to his weird
tied up leopard.
Comes to his weird secret fuck cabin.
Yeah, which is what it is, make no mistake.
And then sees that he has tied a leopard, basically BDSM style, to a bed. There's no other way around explaining this. Oh, no, it used to be a woman. It's fine.
And the thing is, just as you think it can't get any weirder, and I appreciate other movies do this, but there's a freeze frame of the leopard's face, or of Irina's face, I suppose it is, at the end of the movie. And you're like, that's a long freeze frame. And of course, David Bowie's soundtrack kicks in. Again, another thing about this film, David Bowie, we'll get to that in the music section, but David Bowie, great song for this movie. There's a freeze frame. Then the freeze frame stops for a minute. It starts moving, and then they do another freeze frame of the same face. It's a double freeze frame. I've never seen that in cinema history. That's up there with how bizarre remember the really weird freeze frame from the end of Transformers, the movie, where it's like they just ran out of money, and it's just like Omicron's head, off in the distance. Like, what a shitty freeze frame. This was a better freeze frame, but then they ruined it by stopping it and then starting it again.
During editing, they accidentally pressed play again. They thought, we haven't got any money to go back and fucking redo that. Let's just carry on.
That's what it feels like. Yeah. But of course, it's against... Again, you talk about the talent involved. David Bowie, this was his biggest song for like 6 years. The music was written by the actual composer, and he came in and added lyrics to it. It's a great song. It's been in my head all week and has popped up in a bunch of films.
But it has nothing to do with the film. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I don't need, like when we watched My Cousin Vinny, right, where the whole bloody lyrics of the song were to do with like coming from New York, or I don't need, what's the one from Universal Soldier we've said a couple of times, the
Body Count.
I don't need something to actually go, this is what happened in the film. But I don't know, mention a cat or something.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, the main theme is called Cat People, and then in brackets, putting out the fire.
Yeah.
So really, it's putting out the fire, but let's bang cat people on it. It's like they've given him the music. So it's Giorgio Moroder who's written, the composer for this movie, did the soundtrack. He's written the music. He's given it to David Bowie. He's like, can you add lyrics to this? And he has, and they're very good, but they also have nothing to do with the movie. He's just like, yeah, I'm just going to write you a really good song. It's like, yeah, but could you do maybe something about like cats? Nah, I'm thinking gasoline. Yeah, well, this movie's pretty weird already. We'll just go with whatever David Bowie wants.
You're David Bowie. I mean, you give us gravitas to this film anyway. Let's just go with it. Can we say, you've said, like, that, the whole lyrics of it, right? The fact David Bowie, you've got so many big names from 1982 in this. Mm-hmm. Am I the only one thinking that this film is batshit crazy?
No, I think, anyone listening, even if you've never seen it, just hearing us explain it, just the synopsis alone, this film is absolutely bonkers. And the fact that it's taken so seriously, the fact that there's so much talent, and the fact that it's somehow quite good makes it even weirder. I feel like this film would be less weird if it was a piece of shit, if it was like a really schlocky piece of junk. But I don't want to say it's the same as like Predator, no, I won't use Predator as an example. I'll use Alien. Alien should have been a totally throwaway B movie. Yes. But due to the art design, the direction, the acting, and the characters, it was elevated. Now, I'm not saying Cat People is elevated in any way near the same way as Alien. However, it is an even more absurd plot. I mean, to say it's a B movie plot, it's almost a fancy porno plot. But it has been elevated by all the talent on display, and it does make for an even more bizarre movie simply for the fact that you come away from it and you're like, it's quite good. But of course, if you hear us talking about it, you're like, really? That movie's good? You're like, yeah, it kind of is.
I mean, you do have a good time with it. You're watching this film, you think this is absolutely nuts. None of this should be working. But I mean,
a big part of it is Natasha Kinski. Like, she's so incredibly magnetic.
The fact that IMDb has given it like a 6 out of 10, it's had Blu-ray releases, DVD releases. It's just, people are loving this film, and I can see why.
I can totally get it. It's one of those films like it either clicks for you or it doesn't. Some people will be like, "Wait, you mean the weird incest clown movie with all the cats?" It's like, yeah, well, if it doesn't click for you, the tone or anything, that's what it is. And I suspect, like you say, I think it's like 6.5 or something on IMDb. I suspect some people, I'll give it a 1 or a 2 and be like, this is absolutely schlocky nonsense. But I bet people who love it feel really passionate about it. And I bet you there's a lot of 8s and 9s out there. Yeah. This is a film for a lot of people I think has lived long in the memory. And as I speak about it, and now especially having seen it, it makes it even more amazing. The fact that not only had neither of us seen it, but we hadn't heard of it, which was the most shocking thing to me. Absolutely. It's like, how is this completely gone under our radar?
Well, this was a recommendation from one of our listeners, Glenn Lash, and he's been asking us to do this for a while. So when we finally were able to,
God bless you, Glenn.
Exactly.
I mean, I wasn't sure. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't sure about this one when you said we're actually going to do Cat People, because I knew he's been asking for a while. I was like, fucking Cat People, dude. I was like, this is a deep cut. It looks absolutely ridiculous. And now watching it, I can't stop talking about it.
This is coming from the people that have done The Wraith, have done.
This is next level.
Buckaroo Banzai. And then this is up our alley, to be fair.
Yeah, but in a completely different way, though. I feel like it's got like a B-movie crowd. Movies like The Wraith. If you're a kid, like we were in the 80s, and you watch The Wraith or you watch Buckaroo Banzai, it's a deep cut, but I can understand why people love it. And obviously, they're the quintessential cult hits. I'm not sure if I'd watched this when I was 6, 7 years old. I would have loved it. And if I did, it probably would have been for all the wrong reasons.
I mean, you're loving this film the way you loved Emmanuel when you watched those films back then.
Yeah, any film that was on after 11 p.m. on Channel 5 in 1993.
Yeah. Did you recognize the detective? He is Frankie Faison. If anyone's ever seen a TV show called Banshee, he plays Sugar Bates. And I can't stress enough how great Banshee is. The reason why I brought him up is because when I was watching it, I could hear him speaking. I'm going, well, that's not Frankie Faison. They dubbed him. Then I read about it. They loved his performance, but they thought something wasn't working with his voice, so they just dubbed him. Just for fuck it, we'll dub him over.
That's weird that used to happen, didn't
Yeah.
it? Just every so often. I mean, we mentioned before in an earlier podcast, they almost did it with Dolph Lundgren in He-Man.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's amazing that I didn't even notice. I mean, he's a smaller character than Dolph Lundgren is in He-Man, of course. But yeah, I mean, you can't be over the moon with that, can you?
No, I mean, you go there, you go, oh, you should watch this film, this artistic film that I've done. No, oh, come on, I'm the detective. Come on, let's watch this all together. Wait, that's not my voice. I got to feel that's probably how David Prowse felt.
Well, I've heard this where people say David Prowse was upset that James Earl Jones, like they'd done a voiceover, but surely with his bizarro Grummy accent or whatever it was, Bristolian, I've seen the clips of him.
You've seen that.
Oh, it's horrible. Luke, I am your father, Luke, I am. It's just, oh, dude, like, did you really not think they were going to voice you over? He's like, no, dude, they're going to go with me. Like, no, dude, they're 100% going to go with James Earl Jones.
Yeah.
And I think history has proved that it was the correct option.
Oh, that was absolutely the correct option. It was not going anywhere. And I'm sorry, but that probably would have brought the whole film down if you just...
Oh, yeah. Like, if he comes out and you're like, my God, you think about that opening sequence from A New Hope when he comes onto the ship and everyone immediately knows he's the bad guy. You don't have to explain it. He's got the cape, the cool suit. He chokes the dude out. But then he starts talking with that accent. You're just like, well, this movie's not going to fucking work. Like, something as small as that would, of course, ruin it. I don't think we'd be talking about Darth Vader in such, kind of generous terms if he had kept the same voice, that's for sure.
Sorry, thinking back to this film, I appreciate owning guns, and I appreciate America being a gun owner, everything like that. Mm-hmm. But it just felt really weird about where he keeps his shotguns in that weird warehouse thing he's got.
Yeah. Well, everything about the house is a bit weird, but yeah, where he keeps his guns quite bizarre.
When he first grabbed those shotguns, before Annette O'Toole grabbed one to kill the leopard, I thought he was still in his office.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
And then he's not in his office. They're in his house. And his house is weird. It's laid out like the bloody firehouse from Ghostbusters. You got that big thing at the bottom. And speaking of Oliver, I'm totally going off track again. The way he's explaining how to eat an oyster really freaked me out. I don't know why.
And that was everything about that was bizarre. That was a bold move. Like, if you're going on a first date, especially a woman who's that beautiful, and you take her to go and eat oysters. I know oysters are an aphrodisiac. It's a little on the nose. Yeah. And then two, again, first date, seafood. Someone who's never had oysters, like, no, eat oysters. I'm like, I don't know, man. He got away with it. But, what was it? It was like a lot of just throwing Tabasco on it. Maybe that's how they do things in New Orleans. But, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He got away with it. So
I loved as well, right? I always go back to it on Avatar. They do all this amazing stuff with Avatar, and then it's fucking unobtainium, right? We had the unobtainium moment in this film. Everything's done in this film. It's all fun. And I know they explained it, but the fact that woman's name was female...
Yeah, she's one of the one from the house, with Malcolm McDowell. I didn't really get what the point of her was. I got to be honest with you. With female, it was almost like they put her in the film and they didn't even bother to give her a name because she's just kind of there. I mean, was she like looking after him? Like, was she in the because he turns into a leopard?
From what I can gather, when their parents died and he's being in and out of mental institutes, she's the housekeeper, so she becomes like his wet nurse or something at that point. She may be like it's really weird, isn't it? Maybe she's a familiar, like for vampires.
But again, it's not explained.
Story. No, it's not explained.
It just feels like she's just there. That's it.
Yeah. And like I said, she must have just been written.
That's it. Like, she's just fucking there.
She must have just been written on the paper as female. We can't even be fucked to give her a name. Yeah. Let's turn her up a bit. Let's just explain why they call her Famale. Like, mate, it's just female. Honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of like Jean-Claude Van Damme in Expendables 2 being Villain, which was very on the nose. That one was clearly, as ridiculous as it is, was thought out and planned. This one just feels lazy. Yeah. It's like, oh, her name's female. It's like, wait, it's already on the call sheet. She can't be female. Just pronounce it Famal. Like, really? Can't we just change her name now? Dude, it's on the paper. She's female. I mean, she's Famal. We're going with Famal. Do we even need you in the film? Can't we cut around it? I've already made the promise to have thought this. Don't worry about it, dude. There's a lot of cocaine going on. Just, she's Famal. That's it. Just get on with it.
Speaking of cocaine.
Speaking of cocaine,
my head is just drifting everywhere. The taxi driver. Did the taxi driver have early bifocals? And when I say early bifocals, was that taxi driver just wearing 2 pairs of glasses?
that's what it looked like. And again, I feel like so many of the movies we've gone back to and we've asked questions, and the answer has often been cocaine.
Cocaine. Yeah.
I wonder how much of this movie you can blame on cocaine, because surely this is more of an acid trip situation.
Oh, dude, they were sprinkling some fucking drug on those oysters.
There was something going on. I feel like there was a lot of acid involved in the writing of this film. This doesn't feel like a cocaine film. This feels like an acid movie. Because, like I said at the top, even when I was explaining it, it has all the hallmarks of a fever dream. Like, as you explain, like, this can't be the plot of this film. But it is. And as I said, as ridiculous as it is, it speaks to the quality that it hangs together. That it just about does enough to ground it, for you to go on that journey, for you to actually care about the characters in a bizarre way. Like, Natasha Kinski, you do care about her character at the end. Like, John Hurt is an affable leading man. The only one you can't do without him because he's essential to the film. But you're like, when he gets shot and you're like, I'm pretty glad Malcolm McDowell's dead, because in a movie which is also already so erotic, he's the one that makes you feel genuinely uncomfortable. This is like, make no mistake, this is a movie about incest to a certain extent. And he feels like he in particular is really, really leaning into it.
He is there to creep you out. I mean, bless Malcolm McDowell. He looks creepy anyway, especially younger Malcolm McDowell. I mean, we all know Malcolm McDowell now. We've known for years, white-haired Malcolm McDowell. Mm-hmm. So to see him with this hair, whether it be a wig, whatever, it just looks weird anyway. I've already said it.
When was Caligula filmed? Because I feel like maybe it was one of those, maybe it was a bit earlier. But I mean, it is 1982. You got to remember, this is the same year as Return of the Jedi. And Mark Hamill's hair wasn't a million miles from this. It just so happens that
Mark Hamill creeps me out as well. So.
Well, yeah, but he has a nicer face. He has like a younger man's face. Whereas, I think he was only in his early to mid 30s in this film. But I think he's always looked like he could be 72 years old. But like you said, like, I get the idea that women could be into him because he's not a handsome man in maybe the traditional sense, but he does exude a sense of sexuality. And he totally does.
That could be the cat within him.
Maybe it is.
Speaking of within, right?
Excuse me.
They explain, and once again, it's one of those things, how did he become a cat if he hadn't had sex yet? They explain that you become the leopard. You turn into the leopard. Okay, so the way I understand all these weird transformations is you become that. Like, your hands become the claws, your face becomes all that.
Yeah.
Until you cut into it and your hand is all of a sudden in the leopard's stomach.
Yeah, again, I mentioned earlier the fact that there are elements of Paul Verhoeven style cinema to this film, and that bit in particular reminded me of Total Recall. It absolutely did, and I don't like. And as much as the gore in this film doesn't feel out of place, that sequence in particular, when they cut the leopard open, the hand pops out and the green smoke comes out,
and it disintegrates. I mean, what is causing it to disintegrate? The
magic
at the inside? Magic.
I think the answer is magic, or again, cocaine or acid, if you want to go into those things. Not literal acid, of course. I mean, acid tabs. But that is the one bit of the movie that I really didn't like. It just felt out of place because, as I said, for the most part, as absurd as it is, they take quite an artistic approach. That bit did feel flat out schlocky. Like, it was there for shock purposes. Yeah. And it's a shame that it comes so late in the film. And it's easily my least favorite part of the film. And in a movie where it's very hard to explain anything, that part in particular is completely unexplainable. Why the hand? We don't know. Why the smoke? I haven't got a goddamn clue. Why does it disintegrate? Magic. That's when it really loses its way. Before, again, fair play, it finds its footing again for the last, couple of scenes, gets back on board. But yeah, I really didn't like that bit.
No, I totally agree. It was just all. I mean, I enjoy watching this film. It's just, I've said it. It's just batshit. It's absolutely.
Well, like I said, I was really stretching with that comparison. Like you said, that's the only thing I can compare it to was Don't Look Now, because it's, again, a very artistic horror film. It has a lot of emphasis on a specific time and place. Obviously, that was the 70s in Venice versus this being the 80s in New Orleans. And there is an element of sex. Obviously, this goes much more down the erotic route. Yeah. But even that comparison is something of a stretch. There really is nothing quite like cat people. Maybe if you go into European cinema, maybe there's giallos from Italy, which might have a closer resemblance to something like this. But from my experience of very very British, US and Asian cinema is probably what I spent the most time with. I can't think of anything which is quite like cat people.
I loved it when they were probably right. I say I loved it when they were probably writing this film. They were acid, cocaine, whatever. They were just chucking shit at a dartboard to see what stuck. Because you had that scene in the bar where you had Alice and Irina talking about their love life, and from what
straight to sexual endeavors in that bar.
Before they were interrupted,
they've just met.
Before they were interrupted, was she telling? There's two things about this scene, right? The first one, was she about to tell a story about how she wanted to fuck a foster dad?
That's where it felt like it was going, yes, for sure.
And the second part then was the weird woman going, my sister. And then she leaves and they went, oh, she said, my sister. Oh, okay, fine. No follow-up whatsoever to that random. So what she's saying is there are more cat people out there. So if there are more cat people out there, can't you fuck another cat person? Does it have to be are you all related?
I don't know if they're all related, but that seems to be the gist of.
So can't you fuck another cat person then and not risk it? Because then it doesn't have to be incest.
No. They said very specifically it has to be your brother or sister. It has to be a sibling, a direct sibling. That was what they implied for sure.
Why?
And make no mistake. Why? Don't ask why. They're very clearly, Malcolm McDowell had spent a lot of time, a lot of effort, I assume, to find his sister, to bring her there, to fuck. I mean, there's no two ways about it. There's no point in sugarcoating it at this point. We've not sugarcoated anything else, that's for sure. I think again, I'm not saying it makes any sense, but I think the rule of, this weird lineage of cat people is that they do indeed need to have sex with their brother and sister. But again, it does invariably fall apart when you ask why. And I think perhaps that's why they left it until the 90-minute mark of this film to actually explain it. Because you get it in that weird info dub out in the desert, that really weird trippy sequence when they're like, well, this is why everything's happening. This is why I need to have sex with you. This is why you turn into a leopard. This is why, kind of like explaining the mechanics of the movie, ostensibly. It doesn't give you enough time to really ask that question because you're already in. And all you want to know at this point is like, why are all these things happening? And then just like so late in the day, this is why it's happening. So you're so relieved to have just some kind of idea of what's going on that you don't really have time to ask, wait, why do they have to do that? No, there's no time for that. We need to get to the final act of this film. So maybe that is why it's been structured in such a way.
Before we move on, and we really do need to move on.
We do.
There was a weird gross out moment, right? I'm sold perfectly by Malcolm McDowell. After he kills Dolly Parton. Right?
That poor girl. She looks like Dolly Parton. Yeah. That's fair enough.
After he kills Dolly Parton, he goes into the bathroom. He gives himself a bit of a wash. He pulls something off his stomach, which I initially thought in the mirror was his dick, but it wasn't his dick. It was just some weird bit of flesh. Whether it was her flesh, whether it was his flesh. Eats it. Yeah. Uncomfortably chews it. Washes it down with water. It's like this thing. Whatever they gave him to eat is not dissolving in his mouth. It's not breaking down because the way he's chewing that fucking thing.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you're not a cat owner. The one thing I'll say in that sequence, and again, fair play to Malcolm McDowell all the way through this film. If nothing else, he is going for it. He is all in. In that sequence, he's giving you the idea that he's still not quite transitioned totally from being a cat. Yeah. And the way he moves his head, the way he eats the food, mate, it's bang on. It's a really good, but very disturbing impression of a cat.
What is he eating? What is he taking off himself and chewing but can't swallow?
A bit of skin, I can only assume. That's what it's supposed to be. And there's a few bits like that. Like and maybe it is something you explained to me. And again, talk about jumping around. It can't be helped with this film. The scene with the prostitute, when the prostitute comes in and it's before the leopard's been revealed, she puts her hand down and she puts her hand into what I can only describe as goop.
Yeah.
What is the goop? What's the goop supposed to be?
I'm assuming that's some sort of bodily fluid as he's become.
Yeah, is that what it leaves behind? Because we do get a transformation scene later in the film, and the one it's the only bit which maybe doesn't stand up. It's there's quite a shocking bit when you see him between transformations, and they cut around it in a really smart way, and it's quite
Kinski when you see her between transformations as well.
Yeah, it's quite disturbing. Yeah. But when they actually show the transformation, it's a weird one because in one respect, for 1982, the effects are quite impressive. But because of the nature of it, you can't help but compare it to American Werewolf in London. And of course, An American Werewolf in London is, even to this day, perhaps the greatest transformation sequence in movie history.
So painful.
It's a bit harsh, but when you're watching it, you are comparing it to that. It just cannot be helped, and it falls short of those lofty heights. Yeah. Quite a bit short. But other than those occasional moments where they don't quite stick the landing with the transformation sequences, for the most part, again, like they do with the cats, they shoot around it in a really smart way.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, I'm still not sure. I don't know what the skin is, and I don't know what the goop on the bed is. So we're none the wiser, sadly.
We're going to need to move on. So anything else before we move on to Loves and Hates?
No, let's go to Loves and Hates. Do you want to go first?
No, feel free, mate. Feel free.
Okay. Number one, I've got great cast. So I've singled out John Hurd, simply not because he's necessarily the best, but I just don't think he necessarily gets enough love for this film. Natasha Kinski's great, John Hurd's great, and Annette O'Toole's great. Malcolm McDowell, in his own disturbing way, is absolutely fantastic. You know, that cat sequence is a perfect example of it makes you uncomfortable, but he's really goddamn good. But yeah, I'm going to give John Hurd a shout because I think he deserves it. And I think he adds a little bit of levity, and he does just enough to ground this otherwise utterly mental film. It doesn't hold back on the violence or the sex. I actually really appreciate that. It's all in on both. When it gets violent, it's incredibly violent. When it's sexy, it's very, very sexy. And it is a touch gratuitous at times. And we've leaned into that to a certain extent with our conversations. But it's quite refreshing to see a movie just swing for the fences. You know, this is Paul Verhoeven style cinema with a little bit of artistic Ingrid Bergman, maybe. I don't know. But it's a really good film, and I don't think it'd be the same if it didn't totally lean into this absolutely bonkers premise. What was the third one I've got? Yeah, I mean, it's not very 2022, like I said, but Annette O'Toole's Rack, man. It came out of nowhere. It just popped out. I was like, I wasn't expecting that. It like I said, that is the comparison point. It felt like the same kind of moment as when you watch Trading Places for the first time, where you're like, wow, I didn't know those were under there. And it was the same with Annette O'Toole. I think it was just that bit extra because they really did sell her as the kind of dowdy, homely, female lead in this movie. And then all of a sudden you got that moment. And of course, if I'm going to be, a slightly more cultured, I'll say the use of New Orleans as a character. Well, we've got that as well.
Always adds a fourth, doesn't he?
Of course.
Right. So I'm going to throw you under the bus, and I'm going to be very 22 and say, Annette O'Toole. I really appreciated Annette O'Toole in this. Not just for one thing particular, Liam. No. Annette O'Toole as a whole.
Well, she's very good in this film, but for the most part, I don't think she stands out for the most part. Alongside, I think those are the three key leads in this film. There's no two ways about it. It's Natasha Kinski, John Hurd, and not Annette O'Toole, Malcolm McDowell. And I'm not going to lie, I was like, Annette O'Toole's doing fine. That is what I remember from this film. So I'm sorry, it's the truth. What can I say? I'm
going to give him some love because he needs it.
And also, one other thing. You're full of shit, mate. You're absolutely full of shit. Well, on to number two.
Can't deny it. I'm going to give him some love because we need to. Ed Begley Jr.
That's a good shout.
Ed Begley Jr. in this.
He's really good in this film.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that bit with it's not his fault. But to take it back to your point from, I don't know, probably 2 hours ago at this point, the bit when they taped the fucking thing to his arm.
Yeah, the cattle prod to his arm. Pointless. It
wasn't just pointless. It was so dumb. As soon as they did that, you're like, well, that arm's coming off for sure.
Yeah,
well,
like,
at least they didn't disappoint.
Drew thumbs and just started ripping the fucking arm off.
Ridiculous.
And I'm going to put them both together. Natasha Kinski and Malcolm McDowell really sold whatever they were trying to pull off. Because I still can't tell you what it is they were trying to pull off, but whatever it is, they did it.
Well, if nothing else, the one thing I totally believed is that they were both half cats. Like in terms of like an actor and an actress, truly believing that they might turn into a leopard. Absolutely, both of those.
Yeah.
Like, and as I said, Malcolm McDowell's a bit of a, as I said, exudes sexuality in a very different way. Natasha Kinski, a much classier approach, but she does, like, everything about their characters feels natural, and so much of that comes from their performances. And they're really what, as I said, John Hurd's kind of grounds the film, but in terms of leaning into that absurd premise, but making it somehow believable, it falls on their shoulders, and they do a great job.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, come on, give me your hates.
The relentlessly pervy dudes. I know that sounds pretty ridiculous coming from me, given what I've just said. I'm aware of the irony in all this. But, the guys in the bar and stuff like that, there's a lot of that kind of male gaze stuff from 1982. And, it is a bit uncomfortable at times. And obviously this does come from a male director. And I mean, to say that Natasha Kinski is sexualized in this film would be a massive understatement. Again, you can make arguments to how successful it is. But, it can be a touch uncomfortable at times. The fact female, if that's what we're calling it, like her character's pointless. I'm sure somebody who's seen this film numerous times has, obviously I'm just seeing it for the first time. Somebody's seen it multiple times could probably explain much better than I can as to why she's in the film, but I really have no clue whatsoever. And I don't know, while I said he's great at it, Malcolm McDowell being far too into being a cat is also very disturbing. There's no two ways about it. He's so good at it that it's also horrifying to look at. You think of all the violence in this film, everything that goes on. The most disturbing bit of this film is when he eats the mystery meat off his stomach like a cat. It is weird. Both brilliant and terrible at the same time.
That's it. Like, so one of my hates, and I'll start off with it, is basically what they wanted you to not like about this film. The weird, incestuous way he is with her. Like, it's really, really fucking creepy, and I wasn't a fan of it, but I wasn't a fan of it because they didn't want you to be a fan of it. So they did that really, really well.
Yeah, but then they went the extra mile and added the clowns. That was unnecessary.
Yeah, my wife, who is not a fan of clowns, was not a fan of that part. She said, "Oh, is this why you want to watch this film?"
My wife, if they were... Sorry.
Love, I've never fucking heard of this film until 2 weeks ago. How did I know there were fucking clowns in it?
I love the idea. It's like a cat. It's like, someone comes up to us. It's like, name 2 things you hate. Clowns and incest. Hate them. Can't stand them.
Yeah.
Well, don't watch cat people. That's for damn sure.
My second one, I'm with you. Female Famale, whatever. Like, I just don't know why she wasn't needed. And my third one, and I really, really do appreciate that, because they're leopard attacks, obviously you need some help from, I guess, experts. But the fact they were like the fucking head detectives in all of these crime scenes just seemed really, really pointless.
Well, I mean, I get it from a narrative perspective, but if you're going to try and cram this one, it doesn't really make any sense. No. The fact that all the cops just let him to the front, as I said, well, let him through, he's from the zoo, it doesn't make any sense. But then a lot of stuff in this film doesn't make sense, so we'll let it slide.
Yeah. Right, should we move on to facts?
Yes.
I had one. I got 2 that I really want to talk about, but the first one, right, because you did a whole out of 5 minutes about how much you loved the leopards and everything like that, and how much you loved the way they were on screen and things like that. Initially, they had wanted to use leopards for the film, but they were impossible to train, so the production opted to use cougars and dye them black.
Brilliant. Well, it was a wise choice. Yeah. If you need the performance, you do what you got to do, man.
Yeah, and you did say as well about Paul Schrader and the way he directed Natasha Kinski and things like that, and she was prominent in this because he was in love, dude. Director Paul Schrader and lead actress Natasha Kinski had an affair during the production of the movie. Schrader fell in love and planned to propose marriage to Kinski at the wrap party, but she didn't show up and she cut off all communication with him. After 3 months, Schrader finally tracked Kinski down in Paris, where she bluntly told him, "Paul, I always fuck my directors, and with you, it was difficult.
Jeez Louise, that's pretty hardcore, isn't it? Did she actually say that?
Apparently.
She always
I mean,
fucks
take
the
this with a pinch of
directors.
salt.
Hashtag me too, man. She's taking the power back. That is fucking dope.
Yeah.
Imagine hearing that. I always fuck my directors, but you were the worst. Oh my God.
I was, honestly, I mean, and to be fair, apparently it's highly publicized. When she was 15, she fucked Roman Polanski.
Yeah, well, I think she's had quite the interesting start to her career, to say the least. But I mean, you can see why he might fall in love with her. I mean, she's bizarrely the most French-looking German woman I think who's ever lived. She just has that look to her. Like when you say she found her in Paris, that sounds right. Like, you know, I know she's not French, but you can imagine her sitting outside of a cafe on the Champs-Élysées with a cigarette and a coffee and just looking cool as shit, because she's got one of those like statuesque builds where you could dress her in goddamn anything and she would look phenomenal.
Can you imagine though, right? That becoming public knowledge in like 1983 now, because obviously filmed in 1982. So you got some hard up director going, who should we cast for the female lead? Oh, hang on, she always fucks the directors. Let's get Natasha Kinski. Like, yeah, well,
I mean, you can imagine why it might be a bit of a joy if that was, you know, kind of publicly known, because, you know, she's quite attractive. There is that as well.
What else have I got?
And again, you know, I don't want it to take away from the fact that, like, she is stunning to look at, and, you know, whatever you might say about her sexual endeavors at a young age, she is such a magnetic presence on screen in this film. You know, take all that aside, she is absolutely star material from the moment you see her in this film. Yeah, no doubt.
So during a screening of the film, producer Ned Tannen reputedly said to director Paul Schrader, "Paul, if I have to sit through this shit, then you do too. You made it."
Fair enough. There's me defending this film. Obviously, they weren't as big a fan.
The producer told him he made a pile of shit. The woman he wanted to propose to said, "No, you were a terrible fuck."
It's rough. Well, the movie turned out all right, at least, so that's something. Yeah.
The UK press erroneously reported that John Hurt would be starring in this, having mistaken him for John Hurt. Ironically, John Hurt was refused entry into South Africa in 1978 when officials mistook him for John Hurt, who was an opponent of apartheid at the time. Apartheid. That'll do. The director liked Frankie Faison's performance as Detective Brandt, but in editing didn't feel his voice worked, so it was dubbed by that of actor Albert Hall.
Harsh.
John Hurt revealed he almost turned down the role because when he read the script, he just thought it was a porno.
Well, again, if you're reading the script, as I said, when you try and explain it without anything visual to back it up, you're like, well, it falls somewhere between a fever dream and pornography. It's, you know, as you said, at least you were watching it with your wife, although it's one of those films, like, you always have that awkward movie when you watch, like, a really sexy movie. I remember it was, like, in the cinema, and we were watching Black Swan. I'm not sure if you remember, there's a very famous scene in Black Swan with, you know what I'm talking about. And I could feel everybody, just all the guys just suddenly feeling very uncomfortable. Like, I shouldn't be watching this in front of my wife. This feels weird, dude. I shouldn't be feeling this way in public. And I'm sure there's the touch of that with this film as well. But it can't be helped.
I'll do one more. So the original Cat People in 1942 was made by RKO Studio. When this was released, there was another film that was released and being made and released around about the same time from RKO Studio. It was another remake of the film The Thing from Another World. So both from RKO Studios, fucking classic The Thing, released in 1982, and this as well. So they were loving the old RKO Studio horror classics back then.
And while I have defended this film, make no mistake, it's not as good as The Thing. Don't go and expecting those kind of lofty heights, but then very few films are, in fact, as good as The Thing.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that, mate. The rest are just...
That's fair enough. The Legacy, I mean, you mentioned the original there. This is one of the stranger remakes I've ever watched. You know, there's no two ways about it. I make an argument that it's erotic cinema done right. You know, it is an erotic film, but it doesn't feel incredibly exploitative given the talent on board. And I do love it when you get great talent that get behind patently ludicrous concepts. You know, you get this every so often, but this might be the finest example of all of like, wait, this idea got this amount of talent attached to it. It almost seems ridiculous. Like you said, John Hurd almost going like, I'm not going to be in this. It sounds like a porno. You can imagine the director really like, no, that's not what we're going for. Sorry.
And then going around with fucking his lead actress,
yeah, well, he is too. You're bastard, clearly. And but I think one of the main legacies for this film is the Bowie main theme. David Bowie, and that leads us straight into score and soundtrack because there's no escaping it. I mean, as I said, the Giorgio Moroder score itself, it's actually really good. I mean, it sounds so 80s for the most part, but this is the guy who helped ostensibly create the sound of the 80s. There's synth everywhere in this one, but this guy worked on Top Gun, Over the Top, Flashdance. Even nowadays, if you want something to sound like the 80s, you still get this guy because he worked on Stranger Things. And that's why when you're listening to this film, it's like everything sounds like Casio synthesizer set to mandolin. It just has that vibe to it. But there are other moments, like there's a bit of everything. There's almost like a traditional orchestral score moment in this film. And I was like, this sounds like Studio Ghibli. This sounds like, it could be from Totoro. It's quite bizarre. But like I said, it has a bit of everything. Sorry, excuse me, I put a tickly cough. There was one bit in the film where they're in the car and it's just a driving sequence. And it actually reminded me of the attack on the Mako reactor from Final Fantasy VII. So, when I was listening, I really did go, I was like, my God, there are so many different styles. But because it's such a bonkers film, I think most of it works. But for all that, it's impossible to escape that main theme, Cat People, Putting Out the Fire by David Bowie.
Yeah.
As I said, it was his biggest hit for 6 years, which seems insane. And he then re-recorded it for his next album, which was Let's Dance at the End. But the only thing I can find is a comparison, because again, you mentioned earlier the fact that as good as the song is, it's got nothing to do with the movie. And the one that reminded me of was Biffy Clyro doing the soundtrack, The Balance Not Symmetry. Now, I went to see Balance Not Symmetry. It's about art students in Glasgow. Because I was like, I went to the premiere in Edinburgh, because it was there for the film festival. And sadly, Biffy Clyro weren't there. They did a video at the start as if say, well, this is for them. The soundtrack is actually really good. And as a Biffy Clyro album, it's actually very good. The movie is appallingly bad. It makes me hate art students. And the soundtrack had nothing to do with the movie at all. It was just like, well, Biffy Clyro is going to make an album and we're just going to attach it to the strange movie about art students in Glasgow. And this feels like that on crack. This is just like, let's go one of the most famous singers in the world. Somehow they've convinced him to attach lyrics. And because he's so famous, they haven't been able to go back and say, shouldn't this be in some way connected to the movie? Because it's not. But if you get the opportunity, absolutely have a listen to it because it's a belter of a song all the same.
It reminds me, it was the other one as well, St. Elmo's Fire by John Parr.
Yeah,
because he did that, because that song is about like wheels in motion and things like that. And he wrote the song, but to do with one of the, I can't think of the whole, but like an Olympic medalist winner. Nothing to do with whatever's happening in fucking St. Elmo's Fire.
Well, the St. Elmo's Fire's narrative and plot has nothing to do with that at all.
No.
And it's the same with this. But again, it's David Bowie in the 80s. So you just say yes and you're like, well, thank fuck we've got David Bowie. Yeah. So that's absolutely fine.
Right. I'm really intrigued for the next one. Video games. Like, I'm so intrigued.
Well, I've managed it, but it was a tricky one.
And it's a fucking stretch.
Unbelievably, there wasn't a video game in 1982 based on Cat People. I don't think anyone's surprised to hear that. So I was like, okay, I'm making Cat People the video game adaptation in 2022. What am I going to do? So I'm going to have an erotic visual novel. You get quite a few of them on the Nintendo Switch, the PS5. They often come from Japan. And I was going to splice that with the gameplay from Stray on PS5 by Blue 12 Studios. That is largely because it has cats in it. So you control a cat. It's not going to be nearly as chill as Stray because you're going to have to actually kill people to turn back into a human, at which point the game goes back to being a visual novel. So it's a visual novel when you're a human and when you're getting down to funny buggers. But when you turn into a cat, it turns into a very violent third-person action game by the team who made Stray. So that's what I've gone with. I think it might work, bizarrely.
That is much better than what I had.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait to hear what you've got now.
Leisure Suit Larry. Do you remember Leisure Suit Larry?
No, dude, you've totally won by bringing up Leisure Suit Larry. Anybody who harkens back to Leisure Suit Larry has surely won. Those
Leisure Suit
terrible
Larry,
erotic
basically,
PC games.
For people, yeah, that don't know Leisure Suit Larry, it's about a college student who is just basically going around trying to get laid.
Yeah.
So that's basically it. You just put Malcolm.
Oh, I thought there was going to be more to it. No, it's just that, but with cats.
Just reskin it. Just turn Larry into Malcolm McDowell and just have him trying to go around just fucking.
Well, that's a perfect example of where this film could have gone under a less kind of without the talent involved, without the commitment to make an artistic movie, because this plot does sound ridiculous enough to be a Leisure Suit Larry video game, but it's not that. So yeah, if you wanted to be, well, what could this movie have possibly been? Let's see the Leisure Suit Larry version. Jesus Christ, that is not a game I thought I was ever going to think about again. Unbelievable. So yeah, that's Cat People from 1982. It's just the scores and recommendations, which should be very interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I have had fun with this. Mm-hmm. I thought it was a good film. I really enjoyed. Like, I've never seen it before. Would I watch it again? I'm not too sure. I mean, I watched it. It was fine. I enjoyed it. I've laughed throughout this entire episode. You know, I've picked things out. That's great. It's still basically a 3-star. And I think that's, I mean, it is, it's not too, it does what it does what it needs, but it could have been better. But I've seen it, it's probably because I've never seen it as a kid, and trust me, I would have remembered.
Probably for the best that you didn't see it as a kid. That's for sure.
So it's a 3-star. And to be honest, mate, I'm not too sure I could think of anyone I would recommend it to. Like, I would, like, oh, have you seen fucking Cat People? It's batshit. You need to give it a go. But it's not like, honestly, just going out there and recommending it to people. There's certain people you're going to recommend this to. Our friend Dave, I'll probably try and get him to watch it. He's never going to watch this with his wife. So...
yeah, that's going to be a very different recommendation, because you're going to be, well, this film's stupid. It's really sexy. This will be funny. Go and watch it. Whereas I have already recommended this to someone, but in a different way, because like one of my friends, he's really into cinema, but he's massively into European cinema, which I think is already going to help you through the door, because this movie has a very European vibe running through it. There's no two ways about it. So I said to him, I was like, don't go in expecting miracles. And I used that comparison point, that the only thing I could think of as a comparison was, Don't Look Now. And I was like, don't expect it to be that good, because, that's one of the finest horror films of that decade. But for that specific kind of person who I know is, potentially interested in avant-garde cinema kind of thing, deep cuts from the 60s, 70s, 80s, I was like, this is a really interesting film. There's nothing quite like it. And I think you'd be interested in it. But make no mistake, he's the only one of my friends who I'd recommend this film to, and certainly in that more approaching it from a more artistic perspective, should we say? Yeah. I do have other friends where I could be like, dude, watch Cat People. A lot of people get naked. It's really fucking weird and violent as well. So you could almost recommend it in two different ways, depending on who's going to see it. But I wouldn't I'm not going to I'm not going to shout it from the rooftops. You have to see Cat People, because it's a bit too weird for that.
I would be recommending it, going, check out Nastasa Kinski. You tell me as well. Is it bush half shaved? Like,
it's bizarre. And this might have one of the sexiest posters in movie history. The one where when she's out in the rain, and the poster is basically just her face, just being very wet in the rain. Yeah. But if you want to see an actress exuding sexuality, all you can see, like I said, is her face in the rain. It's that poster. It might be the sexiest poster I've ever seen in my life, and all it is her face. She just has a sexy face. There's just no two ways about it. But yeah, it's a similar thing. As I said, I would recommend it in different ways, different people. I wouldn't recommend it in general to folk. It would be ridiculous. But it's a 3-star, but it's a strong recommendation for those who might be keen in this kind of film. There are certain people who are into this kind of, potentially into this kind of cinema, seeing something totally unique and different. And I think that there's a lot to take from it. But yeah, I can't go above 3. I just can't. It's too ridiculous to go above a 3.
No,
very enjoyable 3 stars.
Yeah, I totally agree. Really enjoyed doing it. And like you said, now that was Cat People.
Mhm.
I'm pretty intrigued again as to what we're doing next week, mate.
Well, yeah, we're really taking a hard left. This one is an absolute banger. There's no two ways about it. I'm not sure if everyone else is going to feel the same way about it, but Best of the Best was one of my favorite martial artist films of the 80s.
And I can't wait to discuss all 3 sequels.
Yeah, oh, jeez. Needless to say, another example where, as much as I love the original, I wisely sidestepped all of the sequels, so I've not seen any of them. But yeah, this was my introduction into Korea. You think of like how famous, like, Korean culture is now. Yeah. This was everything I knew about Korea. So yeah, somewhat limited view of the country back in the late 80s, early 90s. But yeah, this was suggested by my brother John Pritchard, and it's long overdue because this was a massive film in my youth. I haven't seen this film for the best part of, I would say, 20 years. But when I was younger, this was one of those VHSs on regular rotation. Yeah. I've seen this film so many times.
With films like this, The Karate Kid, with this, it's really interesting to see if the fight sequences hold up as well.
Yeah, because like you mentioned Karate Kid, I don't think it belongs quite in the same bracket because I think that's a better movie.
Because that film was shit, yeah.
Ridiculous. I feel like this film belongs much closer. Like, this sits alongside Kickboxer and Bloodsport. That's kind of where this film is.
Better than Karate Kid.
But yeah, well, yeah, depending on where you're coming from. It's a different kind of film. But again, there's some serious talent in this film.
Yeah.
James Earl Jones in this film. Whatever you might think of him. Eric Roberts is in this film, acting his fucking ass off.
Chris
Penn. Like, oh my God. Get it. Drop it like a toilet seat, Tommy. Like, so I'm totally going to use that at the start of the next episode.
Like, Chris Penn did not get into any shape for this. Oh, I can't wait for next week.
He really didn't. No, this is going to be great. I am super looking forward to rewatching this. I am a little bit scared it might not live up to the somewhat rose-tinted memory I have.
I saw it within the last 5 years, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Oh, well, I hope so. So, yes, please do join us for the absolute banger Best of the Best next week. But, yes, this has been 1982's Cat People. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. But, as always, thanks for listening, and see you next week. Catch you later, guys. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Have a good one.
So where can people actually find us?
Oh, well, people can actually find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. You can also drop us an email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. We like to read them out on the show, so please feel free to send them in. Any recommendations, just get in touch with us. We do like that. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry. And a big thank you to Alexander Ortolan for the awesome intro music. He has no media presence as far as I can tell. He's very mysterious, but makes great music. So thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Hey, you